This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Earlier this year, state lawmakers moved to expand gambling in Connecticut after the governor reached a deal with the state's 2 casino-owning tribes. And this week, the Federal Interior Department may release its decision on whether to approve the amended gaming compacts. Today, Where We Live, we look at the future of online gambling and sports betting in the state. How will this expansion affect residents, including young people? Coming up, we'll hear from a UConn medical student who's researching problem gambling resources. First, I want to welcome back to the show on Zoom today is State Senator Cathy Osten, who is co-chair of the legislature's Public Safety Committee. She represents about 10 towns in the eastern part of the state. Senator Osten, welcome back to the show.
Good morning. It's nice to be with you.
You can also join us, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Senator Osten, let's start with the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs. I understand there was a 45-day period for it to review the state's amended agreement with the Mohegan Tribe and the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. And I think that period is up tomorrow. So what have you heard about the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs? Are they expected to make a decision?
It's up on the 9th. Yes, that is tomorrow. And my understanding is that they will be making a decision then. I'm sitting on pins and needles myself, waiting for that resolution.
And so what happens if Thursday goes and there's no decision from the Bureau of Indian Affairs? What does that mean in terms of how the state can move forward?
The state can't move forward until we have a decision from the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Mm-hmm. You said you're sitting on pins and needles, so are you feeling optimistic or not so much?
Well, I always hope for the best and expect the worst, but I believe that we will have a decision, but I don't get to sit anywhere near where that decision-making process is, and so like the rest of Connecticut, I sit on the side waiting with bated breath.
But we know that the 2 casinos are in your district. I would assume that, I'm wondering, are there lobbyists that work with the tribes that are talking with the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs? What do you know about the process that you can tell us?
I have no idea if lobbyists are talking with the federal government that represent both the tribal nations. I've not talked to any of them relative to this issue. The 2 federally recognized tribes have lobbyists here in Connecticut. I've reached out to them, and they are also waiting to see what the Bureau of Indian Affairs says. So the process is that the amended compacts were sent to the BIA for review, and we're waiting to see what happens. Now, I know that there was another tribe that had a compact amendment or with virtually no changes down in Florida, and that came out on the 45th day. So here's hoping.
Well, there was a similar review related to plans for a potential casino in East Windsor. That was also delayed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs under the Trump administration. So is there precedence that, while we're expecting a decision, you might have to wait a little bit longer than tomorrow? Well,
the BIA and the Secretary of the Interior is a Native American herself. That this administration is much different than the previous administration, at least relative to this particular agency. And so I don't see that I would say that the former was an outlier, not this one.
That's right. You're talking about Secretary Deb Haaland, who is
Yes.
the first Native American to serve as the cabinet secretary. So I mentioned that both casinos are in your district. And maybe you could remind listeners with all of the negotiations that went on to get online gambling and sports betting in Connecticut, at least the process to head to the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs. What's at stake? Why was this necessary?
Well, first of all, the 2 Native American communities and the tribal nations and their business entities are two of the largest employers in the state. They have over 12,000 um, uh, um, employees that live just in Eastern Connecticut, never mind in other places. And the facts are that they provide more revenue than any other businesses in the state. And so the facts are that we need these businesses. They're extremely important to Eastern Connecticut. As a matter of fact, people in our neck of the woods remember when Electric Boat lost all of its employees, traveled down to the lowest that they had been in generations. And the two tribal nations stepped up and hired people who did not have any opportunity to get another job. And so this has been a journey to get internet gaming passed and sports betting passed in the legislature. Other states are far ahead of us in this way. We've been putting forth legislation on this for 4 or 5 years now, trying to pique the interest of the executive branch to make sure that they understand the value of this. And this helps protect jobs and modernizes gaming in a way that has not been done since the 30 years that gaming has been instituted in Connecticut. The gaming discussion happened decades ago. This is just modernizing it. So this has been a long process to get to this point. And that's where we are today.
You're hearing State Senator Cathy Osten on Zoom. She's co-chair of the legislature's Public Safety Committee as we talk about the state moving forward with expansion of gambling, so online gambling and sports betting. Still waiting for approval from the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs, this amended gaming compact between the state and the two tribes. If you have a question, you can join us, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Senator Osten, you mentioned employment and the jobs that are at stake. But the state also could gain a lot of money when we think about
Correct.
Expanding gambling. Can you talk through with us how much revenue is expected once the ball gets rolling?
Well, once the ball gets rolling, where the dollars will be achieved is in the iLottery, which will be handled by the Lottery Corporation, and iGaming, handled by the two tribal nations. Sports betting, the one that gets talked about the most, actually brings in the least amount of revenue, but it is one of the main points of interest of people who participate in gaming. And we took under the umbrella of gaming, we finally authorized fantasy games. So generally speaking, all told, I think we'll be around $80 million in additional revenue, and that will steadily rise in the next few years.
And when we're talking about online gambling and sports betting, so anyone with a smartphone, a tablet, will be able to play these games, Senator?
Yes.
Coming up, we're going to be talking about problem gambling resources in our state, including, how to help adolescents and young people who may be dealing with disordered gambling. So I'm wondering, what protections are there, precautions to keep young people from gambling online, Senator?
So the software that has been designed is actually worked in other states relative to making sure young people can't gamble online. It's state-of-the-art software to make sure that only the people that should be gambling are allowed to gamble. And I point out that the two tribal nations, before it was required by legislation, gave more money than any other entity for developing programs for problem gambling, made sure that they stood up the resources for the Council on Problem Gambling and others. So they have always participated in that relatively small number of gamblers who find themselves in trouble relative to gambling. So this has been researched and looked at, and in the bill itself, it increased formally, even though the two tribal nations were already participating in sending real dollars for problem gambling, but it formalized that process.
You mentioned a small number of problem gamblers, but I'm guessing that's based on the people who went to the brick and mortar casinos. But now when we think about online gambling, just the accessibility of it for people that are of age. Senator, does that worry you at all?
Again, Connecticut is far behind other states who are already having internet gaming and sports betting online and other forms of gambling online. So I'm not just talking those that went to brick and mortar. This is something that has been tracked in those other states to see where the problems are, to make sure that we're dealing with and providing the resources for those problems. And that is what we're trying to do, is to make sure that we're providing those protections. And this was based on our bill, took advantage, although I believe we should have done this a long time ago. This bill was able to take advantage of other states' legislation to see where the problems may be. And it dealt with a lot of those issues.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to get into more of the safeguards with Senator Cathy Osten, again, co-chair of the Public Safety Committee, as we talk about expanding gambling in our state. If you have a question about the process, maybe you're someone who has experienced problem gambling in your family and you want to talk about that, the number 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So for adults who decide to play one of these games, Senator Osten, talk through some of the safeguards when we think about limits on credit, also self-exclusion. How would that work?
Well, self-exclusion could happen. You would have to exclude from each different platform. So you would exclude from FanDuel's at Mohegan, or DraftKings at Mashantucket, or Rush with the lottery. So that's one specific mechanism, so that if someone finds themselves unable to keep from gambling, this is a mechanism for them to make sure that doesn't happen. There are all kinds of programs relative to problem gambling to make sure that, like substance abuse, like some of the other things, to provide counseling and other resources. And there is limits on credit relative to individual amounts that you can put on your credit card, because you can only use one credit card, not multiple credit cards. Although I do believe that while it does not specifically call for the other forms of pay, like Apple Pay or Venmo or PayPal, that is still an open discussion. That is allowed in all other states because our payment mechanisms are changing now. They're moving away from credit cards into these other forms of payment, which allow payment on online basis. So I think we're going to have to look at that as we go into the next session.
I know some opponents of this gambling expansion, including some Republican lawmakers, they worry about the use of joint accounts to pay for gambling expenses. What do you think about that?
Actually, it's been proven that the joint accounts are a good way to keep track of what is going on, because you have access to joint accounts. And so if there was something going on with a partner and you noticed what was going on with your joint account, then you would be able to address the issue much earlier than having an account that you did not have access to. And so I don't think that that's an issue. And I point out that that the gaming bill, that 85% of all legislators voted for the gaming bill, 150 to 27. And 3 of the 4 people who voted against the regulations the other day also voted against the bill. They're philosophically opposed to gaming, and I respect them for that. But this, to me, has always been more about providing good paying jobs in Eastern Connecticut. And when I look at 12,000 jobs at 2 of the largest minority owned businesses in the state, I'm looking at protecting an industry that provides people with a middle class lifestyle.
Again, you're hearing State Senator Cathy Osten here on Where We Live as we talk about a gambling expansion in our state. If you have a question, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So last week, the legislature's Regulation Review Committee gave emergency approval to regulations that would govern new forms of gambling in Connecticut. You're on that committee. Why was this an emergency, Senator?
We had always designed this as being an emergency certification. We knew when we passed the bill that the regulations, in order to get and stand up gaming concerning the bill that we had passed, that the regulations would have to be passed on an emergency basis and reviewed within 6 months thereafter. So this was a planned in quotes, emergency, that in order to get this, something that has been widely supported in the state, to get this up and running, we needed to get the regulations passed in this mechanism that is called an emergency.
We know that NFL season opener also is coming up, and so because the federal approval is you're still waiting on that. There's no betting on the NFL season in Connecticut right now.
Well, I'm sure that people are already doing it. That's the point of having the bill. That's one of the reasons why we've been pushing. Clearly, people bet on football and other sporting events already. This is a mechanism to provide resources for people, for those that are concerned with problem gambling, for those that want to have a well-regulated system that lets everyone know right where they stand right from the beginning. So these are all things that are important to our constituents and to the 2 largest businesses in the state.
Mm-hmm. So to recap, the way the law has been written for the people that are going to be actually operating online gambling and sports betting, that's going to be the 2 tribes and the Connecticut Lottery Corporation. And so the Connecticut Lottery Corporation will be ponying up more money, right, towards problem gambling, more than the tribes?
Not more than the tribes, but they will be putting up money for problem gambling also, yes.
And they'll be operating up to a dozen or more facilities that will allow the sports betting, the Connecticut Lottery. Senator Osten, can you walk us through that?
The law allows 15 brick and mortar sites around the state. Blocks off Eastern Connecticut, generally speaking, Bridgeport, New Haven, Waterbury, Hartford, and other areas is up in the northern part of the state. So that will allow, and I believe that the lottery has come up with an agreement with Sports Tech to act as a vendor in these particular facilities. So there certainly will be other sites available for people to go to.
Earlier, I talked about all the negotiating that had to happen to get this amended gaming compact. How much credit do you think Governor Lamont gets for this, Senator?
Well, I appreciate the executive branch and the governor for stepping forward. I do think the bill that was presented by the Eastern delegation year after year after year certainly pushed the executive branch, but he did sit down with the two tribal nations. The negotiation with the compact agreements have to come from the executive branch. And I certainly appreciate the governor having those discussions and coming to a resolution.
Well, we appreciate your time talking about, again, this expansion of gambling in our state, again, waiting for federal approval from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Before I let you go, I did want to ask you, your take on the pandemic right now, Senator Osten. We know the Delta surge causing more hospitalizations, more cases around our state. What are you hearing from constituents?
I think that there's a little bit of fatigue relative to the pandemic, and I'm hoping that people stick to what we've been doing. It's clear to me that the governor has led us through the pandemic and COVID in particular with a deft hand. So most of my constituents are experiencing a lot of fatigue, though. And that's something I think we have to deal with.
Are there any executive orders that you would support extending, including masks in schools?
I would have to look at each executive order to see which ones that I would support, and I wait for hopefully a review of all executive orders that still stand. I think that one of the things that we really have to look at is what will happen with evictions and foreclosures. I think that will be our biggest concern. I want to see all children back in school, all children back in school in person. That provides the best educational experience. And I think, I think boards of ed are making decisions relative to what they believe are the best for their students.
And hopefully based on guidelines from the federal CDC as well.
Correct.
State Senator Cathy Osten, again, is co-chair of the legislature's Public Safety Committee. Thank you for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We've been talking about gambling expansion in the state, also problem gambling. I wanted to give out, there's actually a hotline from the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. If you or someone in your family is dealing with this issue, it's 888-789-7777. You can also text CTGAMB to 53342, and we'll be sure to put out that information on Twitter at Where We Live. After the break, we'll talk to one of several UConn medical school students who've been taking a closer look at the gambling prevention and treatment resources available in Connecticut for young people. You can join us too, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Online gambling and sports betting is expected to bring in millions for the state of Connecticut, but at what cost? Opponents to a gambling expansion worry about the impact on residents and their families. My next guest is part of a group of medical students at UConn who've been studying problem gambling treatment and prevention resources in Connecticut. On Zoom with us now, Yoga Kammili, who's a fourth-year medical student at UConn. Yoga, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
So I mentioned that you, as well as several other UConn medical students, are actually working on a capstone project where you're comparing gambling treatment and prevention resources for young people in Connecticut to what's available in other states. So what got you started on this project, Yoga?
Right. So initially, from the University of Connecticut, all of the medical students are required to do a capstone project. And me and two of my classmates are working with the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling in order to kind of bring more attention to the topic. So we went through a number of different ideas of what we could do to kind of bring more light to the matter. And one of the best ideas that we had that we wanted to pursue was to compare Connecticut to other states in New England as well as the rest of the country about regarding the number of resources available specifically to adolescents that are having problems with gambling.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned bring light to this issue, and I read your testimony before the legislature earlier this year. As future physicians in training, you say it's important for people to understand the implications that addiction, also problem gambling, can have. And when I think about addiction, it comes in many forms, but maybe not top of mind for people that problem gambling is serious and does affect many Americans.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big reasons we chose to work with the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling was when we're taught about addiction in medical school or just through our education, we generally talk about like drug addiction or like alcohol abuse. And I'm sorry about that, I'm in the hospital right now, but we very rarely talk about problems with gambling and how that's an addiction on its own. And, it has very similar physiology when it comes to just like, when it comes to like the parts of your brain that get activated by that instant gratification. So, we really think that it's not talked about enough.
Oh, and I was talking with Senator Osten. I asked her about, what are the safeguards in place to keep adolescents and young people from online gambling. And she said that there's state-of-the-art software. So can you talk a little bit about that? What have you learned when we look at other states like California or Nevada and how they're handling problem gambling among the young people?
Right. So based on our just like primary literary searching so far, the main things we saw about California and Nevada were not necessarily, we didn't focus on how they were preventing adolescents from gambling, but more so they just provided more resources after the thought. Like they know that there has been an increase in problem gambling among the younger population. So they were making it clear that they had resources available to help those individuals. I know in Connecticut, there are a lot of resources available for adults. The Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, they have that hotline. They have a ton of resources. And even here, we have people trained to deal with adolescents, but it's just not something that we think has been given the amount of resources that it could use. So I'm honestly not sure about what the state-of-the-art technology they're using is. The only thing I can kind of think in response to that is younger people are quite resourceful and intelligent, especially when it comes to technology. And I can't say exactly how, but I feel like there are probably ways of kind of bypassing a lot of that security. And especially when it's just accessible via smartphone or tablets. Mm-hmm. So I think it's not enough to just think about how we're going to prevent it, but also provide resources for when there is an increase.
Exactly. When we talk about addiction and the impact on... outside 220. And yes, Yoga, you said that you're in a hospital right now. We appreciate your time.
Yeah.
No problem. When we talk about addiction and how it impacts the brain, can you talk, what do we know about with brain development and how that might make young people more susceptible to gambling and the excitement of it?
Right. So, I mean, some of the studies that we saw that were just looking into adolescents with problems with gambling, just due to like the inherent developmental and cognitive immaturities with adolescents, they're more susceptible to problem gambling. And they've been shown to have like lower self-esteem. They're more likely to be impulsive. And when compared to peers who don't have problem gambling, they're even more at risk for like substance abuse and other problems with just like impulsive decisions. So as easily as it is for adults to be affected by problem gambling, just based on what we read so far, it would not be like out of question to think that it would be even more easy. It would be even easier for adolescents to kind of fall into this addiction with gambling.
I hope you don't mind if I bring up your age. You're in your mid-20s. And so are there things about online gambling that might appeal to you or some of your peers?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the things we were looking at when we were looking into this were people even younger than myself, but even people my age. Like I have actually, I know people that at my age that have never been to a casino, but they play online poker regularly. I know people who they don't feel like it's worth driving all the way to a casino, but just how easy it is to be able to gamble from your smartphone while you're just sitting in the comfort of your home or just to pass time. I think turning gambling into something that's more electronic, it just makes it far more accessible and interesting to the younger generation.
We know that the state through this new law that the casinos are each going to be paying about $500,000 annually towards resources for problem gambling. The Connecticut lottery will be ponying up another million or so. And so, are you feeling confident based on what you and your colleagues have been studying that there's money set aside for this, but what are the best ways to approach this that will also reach young people, Yoga?
Right. So I think it's awesome that these organizations are putting aside money for like to provide more resources for the people who could have problems from these new laws. But I think the big thing is going to be listening to the experts and kind of having them put together a plan of how to properly spend this money in order to prevent serious problems for individuals in the future. So, I mean, me and my classmates, we're pretty new to this field. All of the information that we have so far is based on research that we've done over the past year or two. The people at Connecticut Council of Problem Gambling, they have been doing this for years. They know even more. And they are regularly giving testimonies to Congress in regards to how we can prevent big problems in the future. So I think the best thing to do is going to be just to follow their advice and put together a plan where we can spend this money effectively and efficiently.
I'd asked you about you being in your 20s and how online gambling might appeal to some of your peers. Any personal experience with that in terms of what is it about certain video games that make you attracted to play them and maybe it becomes more compulsive?
Right. So there's a lot of video games on the market where they have like loot boxes or it's a pay to play or pay to win kind of scheme where it can be a free to play game, which attracts many users, but then there's hidden costs or there's incentives in the game to spend a lot of money. And so that I can see affecting a lot of the younger population who are interested in these video games and are initially drawn in by the fact that they are free to play. I have a younger cousin who plays this game on his phone as well as on his computer, where I think he spent, I don't know, like at least a couple $100 in order to play this game that is entirely free. And he does that because it's so easy for these gaming companies to convince younger people to pay all of this money. And so when it comes to online gambling, even if it's not video game related, younger people are just more susceptible to advertising and anything that they see on their smartphone that looks interesting.
Earlier, I shared the hotline that the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling has, including a text option. But are these ways the best ways to reach young people? What have you seen? How other states talk with young people about gambling? Is this something that needs to also be in the schools, Yoga?
Yeah, so I think like it's great having that hotline and having that resource, but I think many people do not know about these resources, especially like in schooling. When I was in school, there was definitely no teachers or no like day where people told us about um, um, like resources available to us for problem gambling. Or many younger people, they can be spending hundreds of dollars and be gambling, but not even know that they're gambling. So I think a large part of it is also just raising awareness. And I think almost instituting something like DARE into schools where they are kind of bringing more awareness to the issue, even among um, the like adolescent population. I think that would make a big difference.
Well, Yoga Kammili, we appreciate your time explaining to us what you've been studying with some of your peers. Again, he's a UConn fourth year medical student, and this project, the conclusions, when do you expect to report them out, Yoga?
So I mean, at the latest, we're definitely going to be getting them done by, I believe, December. Or, you know, we'll be getting our conclusions done by December, and then we'll be hoping to present it at a conference or at least at our school before I graduate at the end of the year.
Well, you've raised some interesting points for us to think about. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. After the break, we'll talk with gaming, business, and tourism reporter Brian Hallenbeck from the Day of New London. You can join us too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We've been talking about online gambling and sports betting. Connecticut is the third New England state to legalize sports betting. Joining us now for some more context on Zoom, Brian Hallenbeck, a reporter with the Day of New London. He covers gaming, business, and tourism. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lucy. Good to be with you.
We've had Senator Osten on the show before. She definitely talks a lot about the economic impact of the tribes and the casinos and why gambling expansion is needed. But tell us exactly how the state was able to get to this place, because it's been a long time coming, right?
It sure has. I've been covering this issue for 7 years. Back in 2015, it was the beginning of talks in the legislature about how to expand gambling in Connecticut to sort of just stay on an equal footing with competition. Back then, MGM Resorts, the Las Vegas gaming giant, was just moving into New England. They'd won a license for Western Massachusetts. They were going to build a resort casino in Springfield, right on the Connecticut border. A good chunk of the business at both Mohegan and Foxwoods comes from Western Massachusetts. And a couple years later, the Wynn Resorts, also from Vegas, got the license in the Boston area, having beaten out Mohegan Sun, by the way, for that license. And so the competition was encroaching. New York State was admitting new casinos as well. Twin River was thriving in Rhode Island. And so all of this was impacting our casinos, and so there was talk of expansion. And ultimately that played out with a plan to develop a satellite casino, the tribes jointly, in East Windsor. And then in 2018 is when the U.S. Supreme Court put sports betting sort of on the table by removing a ban that had been in place on states enacting sports betting legislation. So it's only a matter of time before all the states started to go after that. And Connecticut was a little slow on the draw there. But they have a very unique situation in that the tribes, by virtue of their gaming agreements with the state, pretty much have the say on betting and gaming in Connecticut. Nothing happens without their say-so. And so that was a complication here in Connecticut that you didn't see in other states. And it took years for them to sort that out. And finally they did this year. And it's really the big development I think that let it all happen was in negotiations most recently, the tribes relinquished their insistence on they being given the exclusive right to offer sports betting and nobody else. And that had been a stumbling block. And the state had always wanted to spread it around a little bit because the lottery and then our off-track betting operators, sport tech venues, both wanted a piece of it too, and had threatened litigation if it was awarded exclusively to the tribes. And the ultimately the agreement that we got this year avoided such litigation. So I think that was what allowed it all to happen.
Brian, when we hear about, again, worries that jobs would be lost with these two casinos, especially with all the competition with brick and mortar casinos, I mean, how will online gambling and sports betting help these tribes with employment? Because it seems like less people are going to the actual casino to gamble. And if you're able to do it on your smartphone or tablet, then, why bother?
Right. Well, that is one of the sort of unanswered questions, certainly that I have about this, is how all the online gaming will affect traffic to the casinos. They say, the casino folks say that this new forms of gambling will build the market. I mean, they'll draw people to gaming that haven't been partaking up to this point, and that they'll see more traffic at the casinos. Now, I think that has yet to be seen, obviously. In New Jersey, a number I've seen is that 90% of the sports betting that takes place in New Jersey takes place online. So it's not driving people to casinos there, I don't think. But overall, it's going to help the casinos. I think it'll generate another source of revenue for them. It's not a great amount of revenue. And I think even more so than the revenue, the reason that they want to be in sports betting and online gaming is that the competition has it. And the casino game is very much one of staying on an equal footing with those around you. And also there's less talking about it. Sports betting has gotten a lot of the discussion, but actually it's the online casino gaming, which continues to be exclusive to the tribes. That'll be the bigger revenue generator for them. And that's when you think about it, that's going to enable gamblers to play just about every casino game, everything that you would do in a casino, slots, blackjack, roulette, etc. You'll be able to do that on your handheld device, on an online app with each casino. So again, that's another opportunity to gamble without traveling to the casino.
You're hearing Brian Hallenbeck here on Where We Live. He's a reporter with the Day of New London. You can join us too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So we spent some time talking about this upcoming deadline from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Will it approve these amended gaming compacts? Senator Osten saying she's sitting on pins and needles. What have you been hearing, Brian?
Well, I guess we all sort of are in a way. We all understand that the regulations governing the Bureau of Indian Affairs says that they're required to act on this matter within 45 days of the receipt of it. They received it on July 27. So if we count out 45 days, September 9th, tomorrow is the 45th day. And as I understand their regulations, if they don't take action either to approve or to deny within those 45 days, then it is in effect deemed approved, which is tantamount to approval. There are some legal niceties, if they just let the clock run out as opposed to acting on it. As Senator Osten mentioned, they've taken that tack down in Florida, where the Seminole tribe, who has a huge sports betting and expanded gaming deal with the state of Florida, they submitted theirs for approval, and the BIA handled it that way. They just let the 45 days run out, so in effect became approved. even since then, I understand that deal is now being targeted by several lawsuits and by other gaming operators who were opposed to being shut out of things down there. So we'll see. Once the 45 days is up, the next step that has to occur is the approval, if there is approval, or the inaction would have to be published in the Federal Register, which is a document that the federal government puts out daily. It's sort of the daily journal of government business, and once something appears there, it has the force of law. Would that happen the same day? Would that happen on the 9th, or would that happen no sooner than, say, the 10th or the 11th? I don't know, but I think at about 10 a.m. here on the 8th, I think we can say that there will not be betting in Connecticut on the NFL season opener, which is tomorrow night in Tampa, when the Cowboys and the Tom Brady-led Bucks open the season at about 8 p.m., I understand.
Before we let you go, we just have a couple of minutes left. Brian, I understand you've been reporting on the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. Interested in getting into the cannabis biz? What can you tell us briefly?
All I know is there was a report about a week ago in a publication that tracks this kind of thing, and they quoted anonymously a couple of tribal officials saying that they had plans for a big dispensary on the reservation. I believe it was on the reservation or very near the reservation, which would be a crucial distinction now that I think about it. But when I approached them, I got no confirmation of that, no denial, but they did say that they're very interested in the cannabis business that is now opened up by the state legislature, and they're investigating their options, and that's all they would say.
Well, we want to thank reporter Brian Hallenbeck for joining us here on Where We Live. Brian, before I let you go, any bets on the season opener with the NFL?
I think I'd go with the Bucks. I think that's where most of the action is going to be, and you can see why the tribes would have wanted to have sports betting in place and the lottery in place, because I think there's going to be tremendous interest in that, and would have been a great time to introduce sports betting in the state. But I think we're going to just miss it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we appreciate your time. Again, Brian Hallenbeck with the Day of New London. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today's show produced by Matt Dwyer. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. You can listen to Where We Live anytime. Just download the show on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.